Okay, welcome back, everybody. There it is. All right, there it goes. Welcome back to Signum Academy. It's our second class on Madeleine L'Engle, best known, of course, for A Wrinkle in Time. That's the only book of hers that I had a distinct memory of when I sat down to look at the series. I know that I've read a couple of the other ones, but I didn't remember them very well, to be honest. A Wrinkle in Time has stood out to me for, I think I talked about last time, for lack of a better word, I call its uniqueness. It's frankly a kind of a weird book, A Wrinkle in Time, but in a good way. And obviously one that is beloved by many readers. I don't know what's going on with my Google Slides. I'll try again. But for this time I was going to try to talk about some of the sequels to A Wrinkle in Time. And this brings us to our picture from last time. Again, the whole series is called the Time Quintet, although that name implies that there's 5 books. As I was looking into this a little more, well, so yeah, there's the main 5 books: A Wrinkle in Time, Wind in the Door, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, Many Waters, An Acceptable Time. And that's sort of the main series. But it turns out there's a whole other sequence of books that are called the OKeefe Quartet. And so in this other edition here, they've called the two things quartets, because if you consider the last book in the Time Quintet to actually be part of the other quartet, then you end up with 4 books each, and that's kind of a nice parallel, I guess. Apparently these other 4 books deal with Polly O'Keefe. That would be the daughter of Meg and Calvin. And it seems like Madeleine L'Engle actually wrote these books sort of in between, while she was writing the Wrinkle in Time's direct sequels. She was also writing this kind of side story about another character related to our main characters in the Time Quintet, or whatever you want to call it. So that was kind of interesting. I did not realize that. I have not read these other books. Like I said, I only really remember A Wrinkle in Time. I know I read A Wind in the Door, and I know I read Many Waters at some point. For today, I got around to rereading A Wind in the Door. That's about as far as I got. I just have been working on some other projects, and you know how it goes working from home. Maybe some of you out there have had some fun experiences with this in the last month or so. I'm glad that you're spending some time with us here at Signum Academy, though, you young readers and readers of all ages. And if you do happen to have a little free time, hey, consider reading some Madeleine L'Engle, and let me know what you think. Send your comments, send your questions in. Find our website, signumuniversity.org/academy. That's it. And you'll see how to contact us through there. Yeah, send me some pointers on where to go with this series. You might have seen here on the box art, she calls these the Kairos novels. I don't know if that word Kairos gets explained at some point. Probably would come up, I would guess, in at least one of these other books. It's a term that you might hear at church or somewhere like that. It's a term used for time in Greek, but there's sort of 2 words for time. Maybe we talked about this last time, actually. There's sort of like ordinary, everyday time, and then there's a sort of special time in which a more spiritual experience takes place, um, a fullness of time in the biblical phrase. That is kairos in the Greek, and chronos is the normal everyday time. That's my understanding. Um, so I think that she actually has written some other books that she calls the Chronos novels, where everything takes place in a sort of ordinary world, an environment where nothing supernatural or out of the ordinary, or maybe even particularly spiritual takes place. I'm not sure. Uh, those novels, I think, deal with a character or a family called the Austins, is what I seem to recall. I could be wrong. Um, so there's like family trees in some of these books that explain how these different characters and families are related. Um, but what I'm getting from this again is that Madeleine L'Engle is a super prolific writer. You know, she's written a ton of books. She hasn't written just fiction either. Um, she's written nonfiction about her own life and her own experience as an artist, as a parent, I think. And those are kind of cool. I think they're called the Crosswicks journals. I've got a couple of them, uh, and they're sort of her thoughts, her inner thoughts, in a nonfiction way. Um, there's poems too in these books. I don't know if you noticed that this time going through A Wind in the Door. I certainly did. Um, she has a kind of section where it turns into poetry. So she's a very versatile and a very productive writer. Um, and within her fiction, she has these kind of two or three, depending on how you count it, different timelines or different groups of characters that she's creating a world for. Um, and I love that they all sort of interconnect. That's a really cool thing that you get to do as a writer. When you've written a few different stories, you can sort of think about, now how do I get all these different parts of story and these different threads to weave together and to fit together into one big story. So for anyone out there who likes writing, you might check that out. But as long as you're reading something, honestly, even if it's just whatever it is you're reading, that's awesome. What better time, right, than these days when we're all stuck at home? Read a good book. Um, Here's one that I'd suggest for you. Le Mort d'Arthur. Le Mort d'Arthur. That sounds sort of French, right? It's a King Arthur story. D'Arthur of Arthur. Le Mort. Le Mort is death. Yeah, the death of Arthur. It's the title of this book. So no no spoilers about what this book might be about. But let's take a look at this. So the wind in the door is or a wind in the door is a phrase that comes from this King Arthur story. And this is kind of a classic version of the King Arthur story in English. It's by Sir Thomas Malory. It's in lots of editions. There's free editions of this out there. I don't know if they're the best, but they're easy to search through, is what I found. Because this phrase, I wanted to see where it came from. A wind in the door. It's got a kind of a neat ring to it, but I wasn't sure what it meant. And maybe if you just sort of stick to the story that Madeleine L'Engle tells, she does have some scenes where there's like a hint, maybe of what she thinks this phrase means. But where she got it from seems to be this part of the King Arthur story, where it's chapter 34 in Le Mort d'Arthur. If you're on your online version, you can search for the phrase, and it's not exactly the same phrase, so you might not find it right away. Because it says, "What, nephew," said the king, "is the wind in that door?" The wind in that door. I think, based on the context, that what the king is saying here is basically there is no reason why this shouldn't work. Why what shouldn't work? Why Sir Gareth and his lady shouldn't be able to get married, right? Because the subtitle or title for chapter 34 is How Sir Gareth Acknowledged That They Loved Each Other to King Arthur and of the Appointment of Their Wedding. And so if you read there, what's going on is Sir Gareth, he's the kitchen knight. He's gone on this quest and he's rescued some ladies and some other knights and fought some knights, and now they're coming back home to sort of tell what they've been up to, and like you do, you have a happy ending, a comedy within this larger tragedy about the Round Table and King Arthur and his knights. There are these moments of things going okay, actually, and this is one of them. So Sir Gareth is letting Arthur know that he wants to get married, if it's okay with the king, and the king says, "Yeah." There's no obstacle to that, right? There's no wind in that door, essentially. That's how I'm understanding the phrase. And so the idea there seems to be that this thing that we want to pass through, right? We want to go on to the next room or the next house or the next stage on our journey. We have to walk through a doorway, right? And sometimes it's easy to get through the doorway. Sometimes the door is barred, right? Maybe you have to knock and see if somebody will open it for you. Maybe you have to find the key through the door. But in this case, there's nothing blocking it. It's open, and there's not even any draft, right? There's nothing wrong with this. That's what I'm sort of understanding from this. A wind that blows the door, bangs it shut, right? And so a wind in the door, an obstacle, a nuisance, something that you'd rather not deal with, but that you have to because you need to have your house set in order, right? And you don't want drafty breezes blowing through your house. So this story, Madeleine L'Engle's story, that is, starts with a what looks like maybe a big problem, actually. Charles Wallace is seeing dragons out in the garden. But as they sort of investigate, Meg and Calvin and Charles Wallace, they find that that's not the problem at all. The dragon, so-called, turns out to be an ally, actually. Turns out to be a cherubim, a cherub, right? We say, but not the kind of cherub that we're used to. These little pudgy figures with little tiny wings, like little babies. as the character's his name is Prognostikes says. They call him Progo for short, so I'll just call him that. I suppose you think I ought to be a golden-haired baby face with no body and two useless little wings. My typo there. It is a constant amazement to me, he goes on. He thinks it at them, that so many earthling artists paint cherubim to resemble baby pigs. But cherubim is plural, says Calvin. I am practically plural. The little boy thought I was a drive of dragons, didn't he? I am certainly not a cherub. I am a singular cherubim. So the art here is probably the most famous, maybe the one that you recognize from somewhere when you think of a cherub in an old painting. These cherubs are gazing up lovingly at a what are they called? A Madonna, right? A Mother Mary, and baby Jesus, a painting by Raphael. And this kind of adoring, also kind of bored almost, right? He's sort of resting his head on his hands. It's a little bit of comic relief again. Um, and a lot of what Progo provides in this story, although he looks sort of imposing, um, he's all wind and fire, and these eyes that peek out from his feathers. Um, he actually turns out to be kind of a comic character. Uh, he's a little bit sassy, you know. He's a little bit proud. He doesn't want to be dismissed. He also can sort of teleport. Apparently, we'll get to that in a second. And he has some other interesting powers too. This kind of mental power that we're going to talk about. Um, he's pretty, uh, awe-inspiring in many ways. But he never really does anything aggressive or threatening at all. Um, he, as much as he wants to be taken seriously, he actually is kind of a big softy. He's one of these nice little angels. Um, and so I think that Madeleine L'Engle's may be having some fun with the concept of what an angel is portrayed as. Like what comes to mind when you think of an angel, a cherub, or a seraph, right? The seraph angels. You probably have seen this in like video games or whatever, RPGs. Um, they're supposed to be, I think, something pretty impressive uh, in the old ancient depictions, right? When you look at some of the ancient art, they're terrifying, actually. And some of the biblical descriptions of angels are pretty wild, right? Um, but over time, for whatever reason, as they are represented in classic Renaissance paintings and whatnot, they become sort of smaller and sort of softer, and much less scary. Um, so that's kind of interesting just to think about. When we look at our Progo, our sort of, along with the teacher Blajani, Progo sort of takes the place of the Mrs. Who and Which and What's It for this book. These are the supernatural characters who come in to our ordinary world and take us on this adventure. Um, they have a kind of power of teleportation, which we saw last time in the tessering, right? This wrinkle in time or time space, where you fold it together and you can easily pass, or if not easily, then at least quickly pass between two distant points. Um, that's the idea of tessering, and here's our ant figurine again, to show us this, or our figure. Um, but this time, they don't call it tessering. I don't think. I don't think I saw that word in this book. Instead, the power that we're sort of introduced to this time is the power of kithing, of mental communication. And I think is it Calvin who says later in the book, not communication even, but communion, right? This idea of really deeply sharing with other people. And the way that Progo describes it, what we think of as mental telepathy is just the very beginning of learning to kith. But the cherubic language is entirely kithing. With you, with stars, with galaxies, with the salt in the ocean, with the leaves of the trees. Wow. So the power of angels is represented in this case by a kind of communication or communion of sharing that goes across distances, right? It goes to the stars, to the galaxies, and between people, right? Megan Calvin and Charles Wallace, and also with the natural world, the salt in the ocean, the leaves of the tree. So living things and just mineral things, just particles, the smallest things as well as the biggest things. So that's a pretty cool idea. It's a little odd in this book. I think that we don't hear about Mrs. Who and What's It and Which. Somebody could correct me on that if I'm forgetting. Just go ahead and you can chat right into Twitch here. If you remember at any point in this book, I hope that was muted. I hope I didn't do the bad thing again. Yeah, okay, that's muted. Whew. Is there a point in the book when they mention the witches from the first book? I didn't notice it, and I don't think that they even mentioned that adventure really at all. The idea of tessering, the fact that Meg Calvin and Charles Wallace went on this huge adventure and saved their dad and saved the world, I guess. Like none of that is mentioned. We just sort of start again. It's odd. And I'm not quite sure what to do with that. It seems like this book takes place a few years after. The characters are a little bit older. Charles Wallace is starting school, and he's getting bullied, which is really upsetting. It's really rough, actually. And so Meg is trying to help him stand up for himself and protect him. She talks to Mr. Jenkins, who's been transferred to the elementary school. He's kind of a weird conflict with him. But so there's no real reference to any of that other adventure that we've already gone on with these characters. It's just kind of odd. It seems like we get a kind of restart with everything. And there's, I think, an idea there of getting kind of a fresh start, of not requiring the reader to remember a bunch of stuff from the other book, right? We just get to start a new book and get to know these characters again. And this image that I put here for this one, although it's maybe an odd jump to make, this is the Virgin Mary again, and another angel. This one's a little bit more impressive, though. This is the Archangel, Gabriel, announcing the Annunciation, announcing that she is going to bear a son, and not just any son, right? But so the idea here, I think, is that these kind of supernatural beings, in the first book, they were associated with sort of singing hymns and whatnot. But this time they're directly called angels, right? They're not called stars. They're called angels, right? Cherubim. And so this is like sort of another level of seriousness, I think, that Madeleine L'Engle is digging into. We mentioned that C.S. Lewis gives some pretty strong religious messages through his books. Madeleine L'Engle seems to be doing something kind of similar in her books. So if you are sort of interested in how science and religion might connect, how there could be communication between angels and stars. Again, this is a really amazing series. Um, I will say that I was sort of surprised that there was no mention of the other book, that they don't directly kind of connect or build on each other. Um, but at any rate, the ideas are still pretty consistent. The shape of the story, uh, as odd as the first book is, Madeleine L'Engle takes kind of a similar approach to the second book, in The Wind in the Door. Um, the first few chapters take a little while to get going, um, but before too long, we are talking to supernatural beings, and we're being sent on a major journey, to essentially save the galaxy, right? So, um, the difference this time, though, instead of going out and traveling by tessering, right, from galaxy to galaxy or from star to star, this time they are going to take a journey from the very big, right, to the very small, from macro to micro is the way that they say it here. So another way of putting it would be to say that a farandula is as much smaller than you as your galaxy is larger than you are. Calvin whistled. Then to a farandula, any of us would be as big as a galaxy. More or less, you are a galaxy for your farandule. The word farandula appears to be an invented idea of Madeleine L'Engle's. This is a micro organism, a tiny um, little living thing that helps our bodies live and function. And so Charles Wallace is having some problems, not just with the bullies at school, but with a health issue. It appears to be something going on with his mitochondria, which is a very small thing, which is real, which helps the cells of the body function. And this farandula is going to be the next sort of level smaller than even a mitochondria. So too small to directly perceive it. Meg's mother, Miss Dr. Murray, is working on studying these farandula and this issue with the mitochondria. And it just so happens that her son is sick with it. So she has maybe some more more need even than just scientific inquiry and curiosity. It's a very immediate problem for her to figure this out. So again, while that scientific investigation is going on, we get this kind of mystical journey going inward, right? Going in and dealing with Charles Wallace and his microorganisms. I couldn't help thinking here of the Magic School Bus. I know that might be kind of a weird connection to make. I don't know if you guys still watch the Magic School Bus or read those books, but they're pretty cool. You know, they get on the school bus and it can transform into different things, and it can get really small. One of the episodes, the bus gets really small and it goes in to show us sort of how the circulation in our bodies works. So it's like that, only way smaller, right? So super minuscule. It's too small for us to really have a concept of what it would even look like, it seems like. And so Madeleine L'Engle seems to be really interested in playing with this idea of, the first book was a journey out to another star, to other planets, right? And this book is a journey down and into the smallest imaginable places. And that's pretty cool, right? Because it's all sort of relative. What's big, what's small to us um, maybe not big and small to itself, right? To itself, a farandula is like us to the galaxy, right? Um, we look out at the stars and we marvel at them, but they don't really necessarily have that much direct impact on us unless we're really into astrology or something, right? Or astronomy. So this is kind of the issue actually is what we find when we go into that tiny world and we're dealing with these farandula and communicating with them mentally, kithing with them. Um, they're very sort of puffed up with how great they are and how cool it is to be free and run around and cause a ruckus and dance, right? They're having this wild dance. Uh, and the whole point of this seems to be sort of like for us to sort of think about ourselves and how we treat our world, how little attention we pay to the things that are outside of ourselves, right? That seems to be sort of the message that we're getting here. Um, but what we need to remember, I guess, is that although things look a certain way to us, when we put ourselves in their shoes, they look a lot different, right? Um, when people get sick, suddenly these kind of abstract ideas about, illness and looking at things under microscopes, right? All this science becomes pretty hands-on and pretty important all of a sudden, actually. Um, so it's a lot about perspective, is what the Farandoli galaxy um, topic seems to be about. Um, so the other, so let's see. Now, no comments, no takers on this question about the Mrs. Who's and what's and whiches appearing. All right. The other really big theme, along with perspective, um, the other big theme seems to be naming. And this is something that runs through the whole book. Right, from the very beginning, Charles Wallace, what he thinks is a dragon turns out to be an angel, right? And our word angel might not really cover, right? Our concept might not really cover what that being is. And the idea of naming, it gets capitalized. It's this kind of important activity that certain kinds of beings, including humans and angels apparently, are responsible for, right? So naming. Well, if I'm a namer, what does that mean? What does a namer do? When I was memorizing the names of the stars, part of the purpose was to help them each to be more particularly the particular star each one was supposed to be. That's basically a namer's job. Maybe you're supposed to make earthlings feel more human. That's the sassy Progo talking to Meg, and then the narrator much later. The other side of this is Xing. So this was the end of Meg. There was to be no more anything, ever. Exit Meg, X Meg, X Meg. So in that kind of immediate conflict, right, with the bullies at school, Meg's job is to connect with Mr. Jenkins somehow. She doesn't go and connect with the actual bullies, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice about how to tell the story. It's odd. I don't know what to do with that exactly. Like if I was reading a story about somebody being bullied, I feel like I would expect to actually deal with that bully at some point. And instead that takes place off screen. Like Calvin's brother is one of the bullies apparently, so he's like helping to deal with that, but we never see that take place. We never see an apology or whatever, right, between this bully and Charles Wallace. Instead, what we see is Meg go and talk to the principal of the school, Mr. Jenkins, who she's had a bit of a history with, getting in trouble and being generally sort of a moody teenager, which is fine. But now she's trying to be nice to him, right? More than be nice. That's like a really weak way to say it. She needs to love Mr. Jenkins, which sounds weird. I'm sorry. It's there in the book, right? It's very insistent that this is what she is being asked to do. This is her task, is to love this person who she really doesn't like at all. She despises. She detests Mr. Jenkins. They don't get along. It's mutual. He doesn't like her. And yet, going back to this kind of religious theme again, right? What we are being asked to do in most religions is to show compassion and to love one another, in a sense of making each other feel more human, so that we feel like we're respected by the other person, like they take us seriously, and we have to sort of show that as well as receive it. Like it can't go just one way, or we get really really mad and we get really upset. It's really unfair, right? But it seems like the idea here is that Meg has to love Mr. Jenkins even if he's really a pretty horrible person. Actually, is not very nice to her and is not helping her little brother out, right? Not doing his job. She still has to love him. And that's a really tough task. So it's a really interesting conflict. And the way that this happens is through naming, right? So through sort of seeing that person for who they really are, right? And giving them the name that sort of defines that. That's something that we saw Meg have to sort of understand about herself in the first book, and showing her love for her brother and for herself and for her father, right? So things that are kind of close to her. In this book, we take it a step further, right? And she's got to love this person who she really would rather have nothing to do with. And then he goes along with them on the adventure, right? So twist, not expecting that. Of all the things to do with your story, to bring the principal of the school along on the quest, that's pretty odd, right? And so there's this kind of third wheel, right? Because it's Calvin and Meg, right? These are the people who truly love each other, right? Maybe not in a romantic way because they're pretty young still. But it's something like that, right? They're really close friends, and they have these deep feelings for each other. And then there's also Mr. Jenkins along for the trip, right? But he proves to be really brave, actually, right? Because he is human after all, right? And he has that same great power of naming that all humans have, right? And so that becomes really important at the end of the book. So there's this point at which Meg herself is being erased, being annihilated, turned to nothing, and that's what the word X, or the letter X, seems to mean here. This is what the enemy are doing, right? Is creating out of things that exist, creating non-existence, creating emptiness. And they are called the ekthroi, another Greek word there that means enemies, essentially. And so as there's this conflict with the Farandula and the ekthroi, Meg is on the verge of being erased from existence. Um, but it's through the others, including Mr. Jenkins, calling out to her and naming her, um, that she kind of comes back. There's just long series of chapters that show us this process, and it's all very difficult to sort of picture, right? Because it's all taking place in this minuscule, microscopic, submicroscopic, tiny, tiny world, right? So it's all sort of thoughts, essentially. And in order to have thoughts about things, we usually need to have words for them, right? And so names for people. Um, and so as Meg is sort of losing herself, the very process of being able to think about this happening to her helps her kind of recover, right? And this seems to be uh, the solution, really, to the whole problem at the end, right? Mr. Jenkins gives her this hint in this phrase: nature abhors a vacuum. Nature hates, nature doesn't permit a vacuum. Not like a vacuum cleaner, but like a place where nothing is, a space that's empty of anything. That is extremely difficult for me to even really make a picture of in my head either. So that might be part of my nature, right, as a person, sort of having trouble with that idea in the first place. So this is an old idea, right? That wherever there's nothing, or there seems to be nothing, there's probably actually something that will be there, that maybe we can't quite perceive, right? And so if you try to make a space where there's nothing, air rushes in, right? That's how a vacuum cleaner works, right? It moves the air to the place where there's a nothingness, an emptiness, and air rushes through to fill it up. So this process of Xing is like these beings, these non-existences, whatever they are creating these vacuums, these nothingnesses, these empty spaces. But as soon as Meg realizes that is the problem, right? That they can't sort of like overcome it by force, right? She realizes that the solution here is actually to get a grasp of that very difficult to grasp idea, right? That idea of nothing, and to put a name on it, to call it something, even if it's a name like enemy, right? Ekthroi, this word for enemy, that is at least something. And to recognize it, and to put a name to the problem, right? We would say, in terms of finding out, what's causing an illness, the first step is to figure out the symptoms, of course, but then to put a name to that condition, right? So that it's not any of the other possibilities. It's this particular illness. It's this particular condition. Then you can start to deal with some of the symptoms, of course, but also the root issue, right? Which might be something too small to really see. But once you have that concept, once you have people able to sort of come to that problem and discuss it and think about it and work on it and share their ideas, then you start to get somewhere with the problem, right? So I think that's what's going on at the end of this book, as Meg is able to literally love her enemy, right? By naming, that includes loving and communicating with, even if it's just to get a concept that we can even begin to think about something, right? That's a kind of love, is what the story seems to suggest. And of course, this Xing idea is still really confusing right? We don't get like a complete answer for it. We don't know what happens to people or farandula or angels who are exed or who ex themselves in a sort of sacrifice. Um, we don't know what happens that they might still be somewhere, right? Because nothingness is seemingly impossible to get a concept of, right? We can try, um, but so there's a kind of mystery that's remaining here that we're sort of left wrestling with here, and I think that's on purpose. After all, she's got 3 more books in the main series, and apparently a bunch of other books where she is still exploring some of these ideas. Madeleine L'Engle, that is. Um, but but Charles Wallace is fine, thank goodness, at the end of this book anyway. Um, and we come back to the normal world again, and are shown kind of a happy ending, right? Not a marriage per se, right? But at least there's no big obstacle at the moment to deal with anymore. So the rest of the series, like I said, not that I dislike these books, but I guess I just never got that into them as a kid, so I never read more than a couple of them. Um, I know that I did read Many Waters because my friend recommended it to me, and this friend also recommended the Wizard of Earthsea books, which I did like quite a bit, and so I was going to read anything that he recommended for me to read. So Many Waters, he said, this is great, like you should read it. So I did, and again, it was weird because it didn't seem like it directly had that much to do with either of the other 2 books. This one, Many Waters, it follows the twins, who are always kind of on the sidelines of A Wind in the Door and A Wrinkle in Time, right? Instead, this book follows the twins, and they go on kind of their quest adventure thing, and they go into like a biblical world around the time of the flood. So the Many Waters in the title, it's got a bunch of possible references in the Bible, but the one that it seems to refer to is the idea of the flood, like literally, but then also like the idea of love again, that love is this thing that is so strong that many waters cannot quench it, neither can the floods drown it. If a man were to give all his wealth for love, it would be utterly scorned, right? So you can't put a price on it. You can't buy it. As the Beatles say, you can't buy me love. And the image there, right, is this fire that nothing can put out, right? This light that nothing can extinguish, can X out, right? So the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, very, very beautiful poetry. And even if you don't read any other books in the Bible, if you like Madeleine L'Engle's books, you might want to check out some of the places she gets her titles and her ideas. And so this would be one of them. And it's really, really worth it. So the twins have their kind of parallel, quest going on in the Bible story world. And I think, as far as I can recall, love, again, plays a pretty important role in that book. But yeah, it seems like these books are pretty much like you can read them in whatever order, which is pretty cool. They do connect in small ways or in big ways. I'm not really sure. They come together into these groups of 5 and 3 or 4 and 4, depending on how you count. It seems like all of the threads of the story sort of come together in this 5th book, because it brings in Polly, the character from the other 3, and then also some of the storylines from the main or the original 4. or however we want to think about it. So like they all sort of come together in this idea of the acceptable time, right? The kairos time, the time of fullness of spiritual experience and whatnot. So that is about all I can tell you guys about Madeleine L'Engle. If you all have thoughts, I hope you'll type them in and send them in real quick here before we wrap up. Yeah, highly recommend her books and her source books. Mort d'Arthur is pretty amazing, and there is a whole long course on Mort d'Arthur. It's a big book, and so there's a long audio course that the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen he did on his Mythgard Academy, and the Mythgard Academy is kind of like this, only with a lot more bits of reading for people to dig into, and it's pretty awesome. I recommend it. So if Mort d'Arthur is a little bit intimidating, maybe as you're reading it, you can be listening to the audio that the Mythgard Institute Academy put together, which is really cool. So check that out, and maybe find like a different retelling of the Mort d'Arthur if it's too big to tackle right now. There's a really good one by Roger Lancelyn Green. So if you search for Green and King Arthur stories, it's a book that's like a retelling that sort of does a nice job of bringing together some of the most important parts of the story and maybe leaving out some of the redundant, like the jousting and the it's just there's a lot in there. So he makes some cuts. Green is kind of an interesting character. He's loosely connected with the Inklings, with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. I don't know how close he was to the Inklings group, but he's sort of in that same circle of authors, I believe. He might have been one of their students or something like that, actually. So that might be a good one to check out. There is some retellings of Greek myths that he did too that are really well done, I think. So check out your King Arthur stories. Check out more Madeleine L'Engle. And if you like Tolkien and Lewis, there's many, many more things from them to read. I know what I was meaning to tell you guys about this genre, right? It's often described, A Wrinkle in Time, as a science fiction because there's a lot of science and it is fiction. It has a lot of fantasy elements too. Wind in the Door also. You have angels. That's not usually there in a science fiction book, right? But it is. And so this kind of sci-fi fantasy question, like how do you draw the line, that seems to be something Madeleine L'Engle is also really interested in. And so she has these stories that are more, realistic, that don't have supernatural events. She has these stories that do have supernatural events, and then she kind of plays with the different ways that those take place. Sometimes they're more science-y, sometimes they're more fantasy-ish, right? Or sort of a mix. And so if you're into science fiction, Tolkien and Lewis had like a little writing challenge with each other where they tried to write time and space travel stories. And Tolkien never finished his, but there's versions of it out there in different places. And Lewis, of course, wrote 3 or 4 or something, like I think 3 that he finished, that are his space trilogy, quote unquote. And they're really cool. So if you like, this kind of science fiction type books, that might be one to check out too. So the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. It's less well known than Narnia. Obviously, pretty much everything is less well known than Narnia, but it's really pretty amazing. It's pretty good. So that might be something to read too with your free time. But so for next time, here in the Signum Academy, what we're planning to read is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So the sequel to the first Harry Potter book, Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone. I read it in the Sorcerer's Stone version. I don't think there's big differences, but we're definitely going to talk about that term, the idea of the Philosopher's Stone and the alchemists, right? Because I think that's really cool. I'm always really fascinated by where authors get their ideas, and they usually sort of are upfront with it. They'll put it right in the title for you, right? They'll put a reference to something else that's pretty clear, so that you will notice it, and that's fun. That's part of the fun of reading these old books, or not so old. In the case of J.K. Rowling's books, they're not that old at all. So read or reread your Harry Potter for next time. Read at least book 1 and book 2 if you can. And we will talk mostly about book 2 of Harry Potter. The first Monday, March, April, May. Wow, it's already almost May. That's crazy. Holy mo. Okay, so read your Harry Potter if you have some time, or listen to some audio of all the good stuff out there from Signum and Mythgard. It's a great time to do a little reading if you've got like a garden or a chair you can put outside, at least on the balcony or something. It's great weather right now where I am anyway. I hope it is where you are too. So enjoy it, and take care of yourselves. Thanks again for joining me, and if you're watching this later, for listening in, playing along with the Signum Academy. Next time, J.K. Rowling. Till then, see ya. Take care.